everyone, and welcome to the PropCast. My name is Louisa Dickens, co-founder of LMR Re and board director of the UKPA, and I shall be your weekly host. Each week for 30 minutes, we'll be connecting the VCs, PropTech startups, and real estate professionals globally, and assist in bridging that famous communication gap we all love talking about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the PropCast. Last season, we spoke with the global CIO of Cushman & Wakefield and Stanley on racial diversity within real estate technology. And today, we'll be speaking with our Canadian friends, Kim Lewis, Senior Vice President of Technology at Oxford Properties, and Courtney Cooper, Principal of Elate Partners, on gender diversity within our space. So welcome to the show, ladies.
Really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us here today. I'm excited for the conversation.
Now, for everyone listening, I'll give you a bit of background to both Kim and Courtney. So Kim joined Oxford Properties Group in January 2020 as a SVP of Technology. Oxford Properties Group, established in 1960, manages something over 60 billion Canadian dollars of assets across the globe on behalf of its co-owners and investment partners. And they cover all asset classes, and God, it spans more than 100 million square feet globally. Prior to Oxford Properties, Kim held many leadership positions in Canada's big five banks and software companies. Kim's areas of expertise include PropTech, sustained innovation as a competitive differentiator, and positioning Oxford as leading the technology transformation across the real estate industry. Kim is a whiz at leading, collaborating with dreamers and innovators who think deeply about how technology can add value and solve business opportunities. And Kim builds off their creativity and enjoys the challenge of owning a vision, connecting the dots between business outcomes and technology, and elevating ways of working to deliver real value. Kim also holds a Bachelor of Science from University of Waterloo and lives in Toronto. So welcome to the show again, Kim. And now, time for Courtney's introduction. Courtney is a principal at Elate Partners, which is a leading real estate technology investor based in Toronto. Elate focuses on investing in early stage technology companies across North America and beyond. In addition to capital, Elate provides unique access to expertise and customers through its network of influential real estate owners, operators, and developers. And prior to joining Elate, Courtney spent nearly 10 years in real estate technology and operations, leading innovation and business transformation initiatives at some of Canada's largest real estate and financial services firms. Courtney is a board observer of Arrive, Lane, Branch, and Eden, so definitely check them out. And Courtney is also a co-founder of the PropTech Collective, which LMR are proud to partner with, and will be working on something which is coming out next year, which are really excited, but it's top secret for now. The PropTech Collective, for those who don't know, it is an authentic forum, and for people who are members of it, they vary from real estate professionals, technologists, community builders, people from the startup world. It's a network, it's a family, it's a community where we share ideas, innovate, and collaborate. And so we'll be sharing information about that after the show. But enough about me sort of talking. Today we're here to talk about gender diversity in the space, and to sort of set the scene, I'll give you a bit of a introduction to what's currently happening. So 10% of founders in PropTech are women. And there's also a gender pay gap in funding for women as well. So British Bank revealed that female founders get 157 times less funding than men. And in Fortune 500 companies, women and minorities hold 31% of board seats. And overall, nearly 80% of board members are male, which can impact the perceived glass ceiling in employment and impair the progress of diversity to the more senior level. And I think we're generally seeing there's a lack of women in this sort of space, but this isn't say we can't sort of change it in the future. I think what we want to talk about today is, Courtney's and Kim's experiences of this space, and wherever actually to attract for people to see it as another career route as well. So why don't we start off, Kim, with, you've been in software, you've been in finance, you're now in real estate technology. What's your whole experience been?
Yeah, and even before that, as part of my post-secondary education, I, was a part of a faculty that was also, I would say, primarily male-driven, right, in the sciences. And so I would say through my experience overall, there has been, quite a difference in terms of representation. But, in the late 90s, and so that's like a long time ago. Now I'm dating myself, but in the late 90s, it became really clear to me as I was entering, the workforce and kind of getting my feet under me overall, that there was a focus on diversity for sure at some of the large global organizations. It was really clear that, leadership tables were not representative of the communities and the geographies that they served. And in some cases, organizations had self-recognized that they were increasingly out of touch with their consumer needs. So I think back then, the motivation might have been a bit different in terms of better representing, the customer or the consumer that they're trying to serve and driving diversity within the organization like that way, right? And and we can talk about it a little bit later, but I think the motivation has definitely shifted in recent years towards increased diversity, more as a foundation to drive better outcomes and solutions within the organization, right? And so it's kind of, I think companies have realized that the more diversity of thought overall, the better the outcome, the better the value they can provide. And so I think that, there's been a bit of an evolution there that's been palatable for me anyways. Courtney, I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I look back at my career and where I started, I joined Dream as my first job, and I was hired by a woman. My boss was a woman, and she was a very strong, opinionated woman who people had a great respect for, and I did as well, and I learned a lot from her. And that company, Dream, in particular, has a high representation of women in leadership roles. So I always looked up to people like Jane Gavin, who was in the leadership and then was the CEO of Dream Global. There was women sort of. Anna Raddick was the COO. So we had lots of senior women, which was nice. And, I distinctly remember back in 2014, something around there, when the federal government started promoting conversations about targets for women on boards. Mm-hmm. And obviously we're still very underrepresented today. But at the time, the largest companies in Canada had, around 15 to 20% representation of women on boards. And so they wanted to look at goals of getting it towards 30% and above. And I remember being at Dream, and they were already had significant representation. I think they, they've been, they have a number of different companies, but they've been at the leading edge of having the most women in Canada on their boards. So for me, it was a great place where it wasn't something, I was lucky. It wasn't something that I thought about. There was still obviously many more men around the table than women, but for me, there was always, a senior woman who was around the table, which was a very sort of nice and lucky, I think, in the real estate industry at that time.
Yeah. Sorry, I can kind of build on that a little bit. And you're mentioning how you've had some sort of great women leaders through your career already, which is fantastic. I was thinking to myself, when was the first time I worked for a woman? And so again, arguably I've got, quite a few more years here, but I think it was probably 6 or 7 years ago was actually the first time that I worked for a woman ever in my career. Right. And it's probably right around the same, 2014, right? Interestingly enough. So prior to that, completely male dominated leadership from my experience.
Yeah. It's so you're saying there started to be more of a change in focus, and I guess businesses and governments taking this more seriously around to 2014. We're all in real estate technology now. What's maybe Kim, you obviously coming from finance more recently, what's your experience been so far of it?
Yeah. And I'll go back to something Courtney just said, I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it because I'd say for me, as I progressed through my career, it was just sort of the way it was. You find one, I think, ways of thriving in an environment that might not be quite tuned for you and how you think. But also, back to Courtney saying, like you find organizations, right, who share the same cultural values as you do. And, and then gender, in a lot of cases doesn't really matter, right? Because you're aligned at the most basic level. And so, my experience within the real estate space, and I actually started my career in real estate and then went off in 100 different directions. And now I'm back in real estate. I would say that, there is a very keen awareness that, having a level of diversity within the organization is super important overall. I think that the real estate industry as a whole, and at the sort of individual organization perspective have declared that outwardly. So, part of it is saying it out loud, right? And I think every organization, and, Oxford and OMERS included, are, very, very focused on making sure that, not only are we saying, that it's important, but that there is, really keen and focused leadership support, tools, practices, encouragement, you name it, right? In order to shift the behaviors within the organization, to bring to light some of the things that need to be different or change in order to increase that diversity over time, right?
Yeah, it's definitely going to take time for sure. Courtney, what's your experience been?
So I want to touch on something that I was thinking about as Kim was talking. So recently, at the beginning of the pandemic, I got a desk from Branch, which is one of our portfolio companies, and it was a sit-stand desk. And they connected me with somebody to do an ergonomic assessment when I set it up. And one of the things that I realized, I'm 5'6", which is pretty average for women. But one of the things she was telling me was that I've never had a desk that was the right size, because all desks and chairs are designed for, the average man. And so I think what's really interesting about it is, there's a lot that's changing, but we also have to recognize that, the organizations are still changing to become more diverse. And a lot of things that were designed for men. I mean, there's similar stories about, years ago, but not knowing where that, I forget whose story this was, but, some founder who was pitching and, didn't when asked where the women's bathroom was, nobody knew. It's just, organizations are changing and we don't realize you don't realize what might be holding people back or what structurally might be in place because we're all sort of used to it. That's the way it is. And so we're starting to now become more conscious of what's changing. I mean, I think that companies are making big strides, even things like parental leave and not just maternity leave, and men taking breaks. That starts to normalize that, this is a major change in families, and it doesn't have to be sort of to the detriment of women. It can be a burden and a joy that's shared between the two. And it doesn't have to be just women that, if they have children, they need to step back, and men taking a bigger role in the home, which we are starting to see more. And that allows women to thrive at work and have more of ability to, have a discussion of who should take on different roles, and who should, do more at home. So I think that, just in general, things are changing in the workplace, at home, and sort of just in society in general. But I think that if you're the only, whether you're the only woman in the room or the only any kind of person in the room, it's very difficult to advocate for yourself or to point out some of these things that need to be changed. And as we see more diverse people around the table, to Kim's point, there's proof that this leads to better outcomes and actually better business outcomes, but it also starts to make people realize that some of the rules and organizational norms might need to shift and for the better for everyone, for the most part.
Yeah. I also would love to get your take on this as well, Courtney. So Courtney, you can tell our listeners about the PropTech Collective, but from a recruiter's angle, I've obviously helped larger business, larger funds, startups, hire people from junior to senior. Now, at the more junior level, the feedback I get from women entering this space, they're very keen on having, like Kim mentioned, senior management or senior leaders who are women, and they've often not taken a job opportunity because that's just not there. And I think this might be maybe more seen in startups or earlier stage business who can really sort of make that change and ensure that, I guess, there's a diverse sort of team at the senior level. What have you seen, Courtney, or feedback you might have had from some of your portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. A lot of our portfolio companies have focused on diversity from the very beginning. So we're lucky to have seen that, and people are very conscious of it. But I've had the same conversations with women who are considering joining a team, and if it's 10 men or 10 white men, being the first woman or the first person who's sort of has a different perspective is hard. And so, that's something that can come up, and hopefully companies, don't get to the point where, they haven't set up and looked for diverse talent from the beginning. So a lot of our companies now are really focused on that. I mean, Lane, which is based in Toronto, they are incredibly diverse. And I think that, they had a bit of luck that the founding team is diverse. They are based in Toronto, which has a diverse talent pool to hire from. But then I think that, some of our companies are starting to take action, especially after all the conversations this summer, trying to figure out how they can recruit from more diverse environments and create sort of a more diverse candidate pipeline, as well as, trying out different things like blind resume reviews. So taking the names off for hiring managers so that they can look at the credentials and look at what's on the paper first before understanding whether it's a man or a woman or what their background might be.
Interesting. Maybe that's something we should start doing. Kim, what about you? Have you joined sort of any associations, or do you get involved in any sort of mentorship since over your career?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's been a huge part of, I think that's a huge part of everyone's professional growth regardless. But I think, specifically, as a woman with aspirations, let's say, right? It's really important, and it has been really important for me to create and kind of nurture a really strong and diverse network, right, of colleagues and friends, where you can, kind of let your hair down a little bit and share some experiences, right, like real life experiences, and kind of work through, some tactics on how best to kind of move forward. I think that's been huge. The other thing that, I can't underline enough is, and associations are important. We'll get to that in a second, but really having individuals surrounding you that are, I'm going to say, like true mentors, right? So it's one thing to have a network of, I'll call it like work friends, right? But true mentors who have got, a wealth of experience, who may have, gone down the path that you're attempting to go down, themselves, and are really, reflective and insightful of the journey, and kind of helping you work through, next steps or how to approach situations, et cetera. And so, when I think back to some, situations where you're kind of at a fork in the road or whatever, having a mentor or two that you can kind of work with has been super important. And I'll just put it out there again, like when I think back to the mentors that I've had through the years, and it might just be because, I've been in technology in male dominated, environments my entire career, right? Male dominated industries. The mentors that I've, worked with have all been men, interestingly enough. But these are men who are, 100% motivated and just simply interested in supporting the success of individuals, right? Of people, and very open-minded that way, where where gender just didn't matter. And it might just be that I gravitate towards that, generally speaking. But I think mentorship is huge. And then you guys can talk about associations, because I know there's tons out there, and I've been a part of that as well, right? It's been great. So,
well, I think it quite ties, like Courtney, I'll definitely let you talk about it, because this is your thing, the PropTech Collective. But there's quite a few associations where it's meant to be a women's only association, and that I don't necessarily think men shouldn't be allowed into it. So Courtney, tell us.
Can I tell a story about that? This is like classic. Oh my goodness. And so this is where, I would say I naively walked into a situation. So same thing, like women in technology and whatever industry, right? Great big event. And, you're invited, you can invite a colleague. I'm like, fantastic. Like, let's look at the agenda. And I gave it a whole bunch of thought. Who do I know that would benefit from this agenda and the speakers and the topics, etc.? And so I invited a male colleague, to come with me. And literally this poor person was the only male in the room of like 400 people, right? And this is, again, like a good few years ago. And I thought, it's interesting to me, right? And then I'm thinking, oh my goodness, am I not supporting the mandate the way I should be supporting the mandate? But I'm with you, Louisa. Like, to me, a lot of the topic of discussion that you end up getting into in a professional environment like this, a lot of it is very, very beneficial to everybody, regardless, right? So anyhow, there's my little story. And I've never lived it down. This poor person, like, I always send them a really nice holiday gift. I'm still apologizing, right? Classic. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we started PropTech Collective. It was originally Women in PropTech Canada. So, Nikki Greenberg out of New York is growing a global organization, and we got the opportunity to launch it in Canada. And I think what was really interesting was it wasn't an organization focused on women's issues. PropTech Collective and Women in PropTech Canada. The conversation is around how do you bridge the gap between real estate and technology? How do we think about adoption of technology in the real estate industry, and what are some of the key problems that we're looking to solve, and how can technology help? And so, when we ended up rebranding PropTech to PropTech Collective and focusing on Canada, that was one of the things we were thinking about is diversity is incredibly important. And I think that the goal around having, very diverse speakers, like we are looking to spotlight and have speakers that are, 70% women or Black, people of color, Indigenous, just really focus. One of our focuses and goals internally is let's make sure that we're creating opportunities for underrepresented groups and underrepresented people. And, there's lots of organizations that have incredible speakers and have, the CEOs of large companies and have people who are regulars on the speaker circuit. And, we will definitely include some of them, but we also want to spend a lot of time focusing on how do we actually create change in the industry, and who has a diverse perspective, or who's doing great work that hasn't necessarily had the opportunity to share it and discuss it. And for us, how do you create bridges across technology and real estate? There's education components for sure, and content is important, but building relationships between the technology and real estate side, and getting people to know one another and understand their problems better is what we believe is a key piece of it. So that's a lot of what we focus on. And, but within that, we still believe that trying to find amazing people to highlight that might not have as many opportunities or might not be seen yet. And, I can speak for myself. It's very hard to get onto your first panel or your first speaking opportunity. But once you've done it and people see it and they're like, oh, they were good. Then all of a sudden you're like on the radar, because conference organizers are very, very focused on how do they have a diverse group of speakers. Even one of our portfolio companies had a CEO panel webinar, and, they got called out that it was all male. People are very conscious of this right now. And so people are looking for women and Black people and people of color and just people who, can provide diversity, but, people find it hard. And Louisa, you would know this, I'm sure you can provide context here. It's not that they're not there. We look at the workforce, it's 50% women. If you look at graduation rates from STEM and law degrees and doctors, like I think in many cases it's more women than men now. So there is incredible talent pipelines, and there are incredible women that are at all levels, women and other diverse folks. So I think part of it is being conscious and sometimes finding ways to invite more people to apply, so that when you're I truly believe you should choose the best suited person for a job or a speaking opportunity. But sometimes, you can't just stop and say, oh, well, the only people that applied were white men. How do we make sure that we're getting the right candidates to come into the funnel, or looking at a broad enough group?
Yeah. Well, Adam's, who we interviewed about facial diversity, I sort of was like, it's really hard to find them. And he just said, just try harder. And it's so true, because they're out there. It's so true. But I think it's going back to what Courtney said as well. It's about giving everyone a voice. It's not just the same people, because then you'll attract and you'll just reach out to the same people. So it's like getting to a bigger audience. So this is quite a difficult question, because there's lots of factors that cause, I guess, our industry to be unequal. But Kim, you might be able to give, from someone coming from previously outside the industry until 2020, maybe one of the hardest years to enter real estate technology. What would you say a large driving factor could be?
Yeah, and it's interesting, and it is a tough question. But I think over time, one of the primary factors driving, inequality, really comes down to compensation, and as you kicked it off, you talked about, funding, right? Startup funding, women versus men. I think the same kind of themes or trends are true in terms of, the compensation gap, two people doing the exact same job with the same level of accountability. One's male, one's female. There's quite a significant gap in compensation between the two. And, I have to say, it took me a little while to realize that personally. But once you're aware of it, it really does. I guess a couple of things happened, right? For me, it was like, does it really matter? Does it matter to me because I love what I do and I can get excited about it? And then I'm like, yeah, it matters, right? I was like, I'm still going to get excited and I'm still going to be passionate about what I do. But here's the thing, right? It's not fair. And so, I think, as an individual, you find ways to approach that topic probably much the same way, a male would, right? As you're negotiating, as you're moving through. And then the other part of that is as a leader and a hiring leader, right? I am very, very focused on making sure that there is, equity and equality, across the organization, regardless, right? So the work is the work, right? And we're, hiring the best people for the job. We're focused on diversity. And frankly, we want to make sure that there's equality as it relates to comp. Now, that's not easily done, I don't think, in really large organizations. There's all sorts of gaps. And I'm not sure that everyone thinks that way either, right? Some organizations are like, man, I want to find, the best person for the job and I want it for a steal, right? And see how that works. And so I think there's still some of that out there that we need to be working through. But, again, in the last few years, there's been a pretty big swing overall in making sure that, it's starting to be addressed a little bit more deliberately, right?
Yeah.
Fiscally.
Courtney, is there anything you want to add to that? So maybe some things which we can do to sort of change some of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I was thinking about this because yesterday, a group that I'm part of, Women in VC, that's a Canadian-based organization it started as a group of, I think, 5 women who were meeting to talk about work, and then it's kind of grown into a little bit of an organization. And they did a survey. I think they surveyed like 120 people in Canada, women, like 2/3 women and 1/3 male, to do a compensation survey in venture. People don't know what's normal. Like, you don't have a lot of information. Mm-hmm. And so I think, having things like that, where all of a sudden you have a bit more transparency so you can understand what is market. And, the results were mix, but definitely still some gaps in diversity of pay, but at least it gives people a starting point so they can prepare for conversations and have a good sense of what market rate is when they're going into negotiations. And I think from a founder perspective, it's the same thing. Like, unfortunately, there's lots of horrible stats about how much harder it is for women to raise money and the different kinds of questions that they get. And, that should change at an organizational level. Like, I think that one of the key lessons I think that came out this summer in all the conversations around racial equity and inequality was around how, the marginalized group shouldn't be the one that's forced to bear the burden on educating others. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's something we really have to keep in mind, is that each one of us needs to think about what we can do ourselves as well as organizationally to try to reduce these kinds of barriers and inequality. At the same time, at this point in time, you just have to prepare better too. You have to know what's coming. And so compensation surveys, as well as, women entrepreneurs, just getting more data and understanding of what kind of questions they might be asked, so that they can be prepared and have a good case for why they should get funding. Because when you look at women-led companies or diverse founding teams, they often perform much better. There's lots of data around how they perform better. So, it's not that women don't have good ideas. It's not that women aren't as good leaders. So, and it's not that women aren't starting companies or in senior leadership teams. I mean, we still have more male founders than female founders in our portfolio. But what I would say is that some of the strongest performing individuals are women that are in the executive leadership team in the companies. And so, that's really heartening to see that there's such strong leaders that they can, go and they can start companies or be in leadership positions in these companies and in their next companies, so that we have more diverse management teams. So, I think that there's more support than ever, and there's more focus than ever on diversity. We've still got a lot to do, but there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of things that people can do themselves and as companies to try to figure out how we can do it. And it's not just signing statements, but, at least it feels like there's a good start and more information.
Yeah. Is there, I guess, looking at away from sort of startups, say on the investment side, I'm constantly working with HR teams, and obviously naturally the businesses that have HR teams are the likes of, say, business size of Oxford Properties, Jones Lang LaSalle, or, Patricia, massive businesses, they're really pushing for a diverse talent pool for all the reasons you guys said earlier. It's, a diverse mindset, helps people innovate, works harder. It's just a different way of thinking, isn't it? But I'm finding it quite difficult to attract some people from other industries because of the association between real estate being, well, one very male sort of dominated but quite archaic, and then technology, which is obviously super innovative but also quite male dominated. Is there a way of, well, maybe actually, Kim, why did you choose real estate technology to enter it? What sort of attracted you to it, and what can we do I'd love to hear from both of you as well. How can we make this space more appealing and accessible to women?
Yeah, it's a great question. And frankly, I spent quite a lot of time thinking about it, right? I was debating my move. So, probably very appropriate question. Here's how I went about that personally. So yes, my first instinct was real estate is the sleepiest industry on earth. Nothing ever changes in the real estate industry. Not my cup of tea. Thank you very much. Right? That was my first kind of thing. It's like, you know what? Like, sure, I'll have a conversation, but maybe, just to be polite in a Canadian way, right? So, one of the things that really got me excited about this opportunity in particular at Oxford and is really around the mandate for change and the very, very, very strong leadership desire to not only, shift and change how Oxford is working and kind of, I'll say, addressing the real estate industry overall, but also, a bit of a mandate to help drive the real estate industry forward as a whole. And so, for me, and again, this generally has nothing to do with gender, right? It's sort of like for me, coming to Oxford was really about being part of an industry shift and being able to influence the real estate industry as a whole. And then also, taking an organization that, again, has a reputation, or, an organization and an industry that has a reputation for, slow moving change and accelerating that, right? And then on the technology side, I think technology is generally exciting. There's no shortage of great stuff going on, across every industry within technology. And so, there's always an opportunity to add value. And I think, adding value within an organization that wants to change is sort of like the perfect recipe, right, for an exciting mandate and a really great, stint within an organization. So, for me, that was the driving force to come to Oxford. And now when your question was more about how do we make that sort of more attractive and more accessible, right, to a more diverse set of candidates. And, I think a lot of it comes down to organizational culture. Courtney, back to your point, like early on, did I look to see how diverse, the leadership team is within the organization before I started? Absolutely, I did. Did I look to see was that grown within the organization? Is Oxford hiring in, a diverse set of leadership and skills and capability? Like, absolutely, I looked into all of that. All of those things are part and parcel to the, kinds of organizations I'd like to work with. So I think that's super important, to your point, not only touting the, yes, we want to be diverse, but actually showing it, right? And starting to, prove that out through actions, I think is super important. The other part of this that I think is really interesting and probably something a lot of companies have been thrown into in the last few months is the whole notion of flexibility. And so one of the, I don't know if it was shocking or not shocking, but, within the real estate space, everybody and this might not be true in startup, right? So, I'll just kind of share my experience, but, everybody works in the office all the time, right? And, you go into work every day. And it's been years and years and years, like having been in technology, it's been a long time since that's the case for me, right? You maybe go into different offices every day, but it's not the same office every day. And so the whole notion of, and I kind of laughed. I'm like, man, I need to get like some better outfits because everyone's so fancy. Everyone's fancy in the office, right? Like we walk in with like jeans and a nice blazer or whatever. And so I think bringing an element of flexibility that isn't as sort of traditional, in the office all the time, but in the office for purposeful collaboration, but giving individuals the flexibility to work where they need to work, to contribute when they can contribute throughout, the 24-hour cycle, all of that kind of stuff, I think is something that the industry as a whole is still working towards. To me, that's been a big, it's been a, different, I'd say, from what I've, recognized in the past, and something that I think is important in attracting, a more diverse candidate pool, right? So if you say to somebody, you need to be at the office 24/7, like, it doesn't work anymore. It's not how the world works anymore, really, right? So.
Position yourself to thrive with a 5-week course that covers the essentials of designing, developing, marketing, and operating offices in 2021 and beyond. Check out the Future-Proof Office course at realinnovationacademy.com. Quote LMRE for a 10% discount.
Courtney, I guess from a more VC or say startup angle, what would you say would make it more accessible?
I mean, to me, I think one of the important pieces, I think Shopify talked about doing this, or I've heard from people who are going through the process there that, they're really focused on bringing more diverse people into the hiring process. So when you're joining a company, you're talking to a hiring manager, but also trying to make sure there's sort of you get an opportunity to speak to a diverse group of people. And so I think that's sort of one piece. And it doesn't have to be the person you're reporting into. It could be somebody else in the organization who is a real cultural ambassador and can speak to what the culture is like and answer questions and just give you a sense. I mean, hopefully that's the case, that the organization is very accepting and of different kinds of people. But, I think that the hiring process is an important key, because you're interviewing the candidate, but the candidate's also interviewing you. So you want to make sure that the best parts of your culture and organization are also included as part of that process. So that's one. I mean, I think there's lots of things that companies can do. And I think that there's some great organizations that are starting to share more information for startups, particularly because, it's hard. Startups, they have a lack of resources. They often don't have a head of HR, or maybe they have a head of talent, but they don't, everyone is really busy and stretched. So, I think that there are some really great groups, and one of the ones is, I'm blanking on the name now, but they're creating sort of diversity guides and tips for startups specifically. So again, more resources. There's a company called Crescendo based in Toronto, I believe, and I was talking to a company that was that is a user of them, and what they do is sort of small nudges to keep diversity top of mind and to help companies understand sort of learning moments and include that in. So I think that, it's hard to think about how do you, so one, starting with diverse teams from the beginning, including diversity in your hiring process in terms of bringing in people within your organization, as well as really expanding your search and trying to find ways to tap into more diverse candidate pools. And then within the company, like trying to figure out what can you do to make sure that you're thinking about how to about diversity and inclusion. And it doesn't have to be like massive projects. You have to start where you are and start with what are the small things that we can do. Again, like I think it's got to be individuals as well as companies trying to stay focused on it and just do what you can to start.
Yeah, I guess it's looking at changes sort of at the micro and sort of macro level. Like a major change could be, large business who have, I guess, the capital to hire a head of diversity but that's a big hire. It's costly and it's, it's a full-time sort of job, but like doing these tiny little changes and then getting it ingrained into people, like you really need to focus on this on a day-to-day. It should become like second nature. Obviously, we've nearly gone through a whole podcast about mentioning, obviously, coronavirus, and I think you guys just come back into lockdown, so have we. Courtney, I feel like you might have some statistics in this. Obviously, coronavirus has impacted everyone, obviously health reasons, but obviously the knock-on effects of job losses, has it impacted women more or not? What have you sort of seen?
So, I don't have a good sense of this firsthand, but McKinsey put out a Women in the Workplace study a couple months ago, and they interviewed 40,000 people at over 300 companies. And, it was not a good outcome based on what they were hearing. So obviously kids are at home and that is, I am not in that situation, but it seems like an impossible task of how do you focus on work and making sure your kids are in school or being keeping kept busy and are actually doing their virtual school, and then all of the other stress and uncertainty that comes with everything we've lived through during the pandemic. And so their study was showing that women were shouldering more of that responsibility, that women were more likely to have been laid off or furloughed through the crisis. I think that the service industry has been impacted more than others. And there's many women that are in some of the jobs that have been affected. So, I hope that as we get back, it isn't the case that women have dropped out of the workforce or and they're able to get back into the jobs that they were in or So I hope we don't go backwards. I hope this is top of mind and we don't see it. But based on their study, it was showing that women had been disproportionately affected.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of thinking, and Kim, obviously someone who's been in technology a lot longer than I have and experienced firsthand in this space, the idea of flexible working and be able to do it from home, it should make, hopefully in the future, we'll see less of an impact on women, or maybe finding more of a balance at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? You would think that, and again, like the last few months, I think pretty much every organization has taken a giant leap into their digital transformation needs and desires, right? Everyone's working from home, which is fantastic. And, again, for some organizations, that was a bigger leap than for others. I mean, I don't know that it changes a whole lot. I mean, maybe it changes a little bit, but I still think that, the accountability for, someone who needs to look after children while they are trying to work, even in their home, is probably, more complex in some ways, right, than actually picking up and going to the office, right? And so it's a really interesting conundrum, I think, in that space, right? I mean, I have teenagers, and it's difficult for me. I can't imagine, young ones, right? And the stress that, ensues as a result of that, and needing to be on calls and focused and getting, work done. So, yeah.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting to see good news on vaccines and trying to keep kids in school as much as we can, because it's just, trying to work triple duty is very difficult on everyone. So hopefully.
It's not sustainable. I think that's the thing that, I think it's okay for a little bit and people manage through, but it's not sustainable. And so, I think there's more to come on the impacts, right? Should we need to sustain this too much longer? So I know.
Yeah, I think Courtney and I have been trying to both balance having a young puppy, and we're sort of struggling with that. So
that comes with its challenges as well, I'm sure, right? So,
I guess this is bringing us nearly to the end of the show, but I guess final question for both of you, and Courtney, go first. So say for employer or employees who are listening, what if you had to give one thing, what do you think is what would the one thing be to evoke change and balance in our industry?
It's a hard question.
One thing.
I mean, I think that we all have to recognize the biases that we have. And so, I think we talked about many sort of tactics that people can use. And I think that there's, more and more information out in the world about how we can do better on diversity and inclusion. But I think that, on a day-to-day basis, I think people taking stock of what their biases might be and trying to educate themselves a little bit more, and really just trying to be thoughtful about how do you make people feel comfortable. Everyone in the room, often it starts from the leadership, and it doesn't matter if you're in a leadership position or not. I think that how do you think every day about the other people that you work with, and, what you could be doing to help or things that you could be doing that are detrimental to making people feel comfortable to bring their full self to work. And so, as we build more diverse teams, and naturally there becomes more inclusivity because there's more people who do different things, but, trying to be conscious of what might not be comfortable for some people, what experiences other people might not had. And so trying to focus on creating opportunities for everyone to feel comfortable and focusing on things where there's commonality and just really trying to be conscious of what you might be doing to help or to potentially make people feel uncomfortable.
And Kim, what would be your sort of number one one thing to evoke change?
Like Courtney, I totally agree with what you're talking about around, just being mindful, right, of conversations and how you hire and the biases you bring and how that affects the decisions and direction, right? So that for sure. The other thing that just comes to mind is that I think we all have an accountability to support each other, right, through what is a long journey, let's call it. And so, being open about concerns, perceptions, ideals, proactively engage in constructive dialogue, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, hey, I kind of noticed that was a bit awkward, right? Like call it out and be transparent about it. I feel that sometimes, as individuals and leaders, if we don't know the answer, we tend not to address it. And I would say, some of the answers here and some of the, ways to approach these things are not natural for everybody. And it's not clear sometimes what the right answer is, but the more you talk about it, the more you bring it, to the forefront and, actively address it, proactively address it. I think, the more change will come. And then, the last kind of tidbit I want to add here is that, as organizations start to really internalize this, the culture and the mindset within, whether it's startups or large global organizations, it needs to be crafted and molded both in small ways and big, right? So it needs to be declared and a focus at the leadership table and part of the strategy. And then it also needs to be demonstrated and adjusted and corrected on a daily basis. And I would say we all have a role to play towards that. Again, regardless of your role in the organization, right? We have a job to do to make sure that we're creating a more equitable environment for everybody, right? So those are the things that come to mind.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me on the podcast today. I feel like we've touched on a hell of a lot, and hopefully those who are listening in, whether you work in a bigger business, smaller business, employer or employee, you can just be mindful. It's about sort of taking consideration, like everyone who we're sort of working with, those who are looking to enter this industry, join associations, mentors. I feel like there's so many ways which you can learn about a space before you move into it. But it's a good space to be in. It's going to be ever changing. And I guess also, if you want to connect with Courtney and Kim, I'm sure they'd be happy to sort of chat. But Courtney, what's the best way for people to connect with, Late, you and the PropTech Collective?
LinkedIn, I would say. If you add me on LinkedIn, send me a note, or you can reach out to me at Courtney@elatepartners.com.
Awesome. And Kim, what about you?
Yeah, same. LinkedIn is the path to get in touch for sure. And like you said earlier, I'm at Oxford Properties. You can probably look me up there. But I'd be happy to engage in conversation. It'd be fantastic.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you both for joining us on the Propcast, and I'll catch up with you after the show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our special guests. Make sure you visit our website, www.lmre.co.uk, where you can subscribe to our show, or you'll find us on iTunes and Spotify, where all good content is found. Whilst you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or if you simply just spread the word. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday, and I'll catch you later.
Hi, this is Nelson from Property Quants. I'd like to invite you to join our Introduction to Data Science and Machine Learning for Real Estate seminar. To learn more, visit propertyquants.com/seminar and use special code LMRE20 on Eventbrite for a discount.
You're listening to a Podcast Company podcast. This was made by Podcast Syndicator, where we help you go from start to grow to making money with your podcast. Let us help you share your message and your voice with the world. Reach out now, Jason at podcastsyndicator.com or Brett at podcastsyndicator.com to find out more. Thank you for listening, and do come back to hear nothing but the best podcasts.